Jung's most unsettling discovery wasn't about empathy and isolation. It was about why certain empaths leave without warning and never return, and what this sudden disappearance reveals about hidden psychological mechanisms that most people never see. In his research on psychological types, Jung repeatedly observed a pattern we can call empathic departure syndrome. Highly sensitive individuals, especially those with dominant introverted intuition, endure toxic dynamics for months or years. They show extraordinary patience. They accommodate endlessly. And then they vanish completely. No explanation, no slow fade, no possibility of return. Jung considered this dangerous not because empaths are unkind, but because their boundary systems often operate beneath conscious awareness. Their introverted intuition detects relationship toxicity and emotional manipulation long before the conscious mind can process it, creating what Jung framed as a silent psychological emergency that builds pressure until sudden departure becomes inevitable. What disturbed Jung most was the finality. These weren't temporary withdrawals, nor dramatic gestures crafted for attention. These empaths disappeared into complete silence and did not return, leaving behind confused partners, friends, and family members who genuinely believed everything was fine. Today, we'll explore Jung's insights into why empaths leave without warning and never return, and why he believed this isn't cruelty or abandonment, but a form of unconscious self-rescue when conscious boundaries have failed entirely. Jung's breakthrough emerged through a patient he described as extraordinarily sensitive to others' emotional states. Outwardly, this person absorbed criticism, manipulation, and relentless emotional demands for months. Inwardly, their dreams sounded desperate alarms, drowning in muddy water, being trapped in burning rooms, hauling impossibly heavy stones. Then something unusual happened. Without any obvious trigger, no argument, no showdown, the patient left a long-term relationship overnight. Total silence, no explanation, no gradual withdrawal. When Jung investigated, he discovered that the patient's unconscious had been tracking relational toxicity through introverted intuition for half a year before the departure. The nervous system had been registering emotional abuse while the conscious mind rationalized it away. The disappearance was not impulsive. It was, in Jung's terms, a form of psychic emergency surgery. Jung wrote, "The unconscious intervened when consciousness failed to protect the individual from psychological annihilation." This case revealed that some people possess internal warning systems so sophisticated they can forecast relationship failure months in advance. Yet the conscious mind remains unable to act until the unconscious takes full control. This pattern was not isolated. Jung began documenting similar dynamics across multiple patients, leading to his account of empathic overwhelm, a condition in which sensitivity becomes a liability when psychological boundaries aren't conscious and clear. Jung observed that highly sensitive individuals often possess what we can call intuitive toxicity detection. Their dominant introverted intuition continuously scans relationships for inconsistencies, manipulation tactics, and psychological red flags, operating far below conscious awareness. These individuals unconsciously process thousands of micro-signals, tone shifts, facial expressions, energy changes, contradictory behaviors. Meanwhile, the conscious mind dismisses these signals as paranoia or overthinking. Jung outlined 3 phases of this unconscious warning system. Phase 1, silent alarm. The intuitive function begins detecting manipulation or emotional abuse, but the conscious mind rationalizes it away. Dreams become increasingly chaotic, symbolic, and urgent. Phase 2, psychological pressure. The unconscious builds what Jung called departure energy, a growing compulsion to escape that intensifies while the conscious mind maintains patterns of accommodation and appeasement. Phase 3, emergency override. The unconscious activates survival protocols, forcing sudden departure to prevent complete psychological collapse. To outsiders, the exit seems abrupt. Internally, it has been building for months. Jung realized this system explains why departures appear sudden to others. The empath's conscious behavior remains generous and accommodating right up until the moment of leaving, masking months of unconscious distress. He also identified a psychological trap that makes departure without warning more likely. When intuition detects toxicity, many empaths unconsciously increase their willingness to accommodate rather than act on the information. Jung called this an inverse boundary response. The more threatened they feel unconsciously, the more giving they become consciously. This creates false relationship security. Toxic behavior escalates because the empath's increased accommodation signals infinite tolerance. The result is devastating. Others believe everything is perfect while the empath's foundation crumbles invisibly. Jung documented cases where people were completely shocked by sudden exits because the empath had been more attentive, present, and generous than ever in the weeks before disappearing. Jung labeled the irony plainly. Their compassion became their prison. Their empathy enabled the very behavior that ultimately destroyed the relationship. The more they tried to heal through accommodation, the more permission they gave for harm to continue. That is why explanations are often impossible after departure. How do you summarize months of invisible damage to someone who never saw it happening? Jung noted that attempts to explain frequently triggered gaslighting or subtle manipulation, making silence the only protective option. Jung categorized 4 distinct ways empaths vanish, each reflecting different degrees of psychological awareness and timing. The phantom vanish, complete disappearance without any visible warning signs. These empaths have mastered unconscious accommodation so thoroughly that distress remains hidden. They simply stop responding permanently. Jung observed this in individuals whose feeling function suppressed intuitive warnings until unconscious intervention became necessary. The gradual fade, subtle withdrawal appears, shorter conversations, delayed responses, reduced emotional availability, but without explanation. Contact slowly diminishes until communication ends entirely. Jung noted this in those whose unconscious was steadily overriding the drive to accommodate. The boundary explosion, a rapid shift from endless patience to firm, non-negotiable boundaries, often triggered by one seemingly minor incident that actually represents months of accumulated violations. They don't always leave immediately, but become emotionally unavailable. When these new limits are tested or violated, as they often are, permanent departure follows without debate. The silent protection. The empath consciously recognizes the pattern and leaves strategically, often at a time designed to minimize chaos. They may leave a short message explaining a need for space, but share no details that could be weaponized. Despite their differences, all 4 share one element: the absence of negotiation or explanation after departure. These are not typical relationship conflicts. The unconscious has already determined the environment is unsafe. Jung's most startling insight concerned why empaths never return. It is not a matter of pride or stubbornness. For many, it becomes a psychological impossibility. Barrier 1: unconscious protection protocols. The same mechanism that forced departure actively prevents return. Jung described this as an evolutionary survival response. Once the psyche identifies a relationship as psychologically dangerous, it maintains permanent vigilance and blocks re-exposure. Barrier 2: transformation during absence. During separation, rapid psychological change occurs. The unconscious restores depleted emotional resources, strengthens boundary recognition, and recalibrates self-respect. Returning would require abandoning this hard-won growth. Barrier 3: reality recognition. Away from the relationship, empaths experience clarity restoration. Manipulation patterns and subtle violations that were invisible during accommodation become unmistakably clear. Going back feels like conscious self-harm. Jung compared this to psychological molting. To survive, the person sheds the identity of the endlessly accommodating self. Return would mean climbing back into a discarded skin that no longer fits. To help empaths recognize unconscious warnings before reaching crisis, Jung offered practical methods to bring unconscious signals into conscious choice. Intuitive signal recognition. Track correlations between dreams, body sensations, and relationship dynamics. If anxiety, exhaustion, or chaotic dreams increase around specific people, treat it as a sign of unconscious toxicity detection. Document the pattern so the invisible becomes visible. Boundary testing protocols. Don't wait for collapse. Set one small limit and observe the response. Healthy individuals adapt. Toxic individuals violate. Early testing provides relationship clarity without major confrontation. Energy tracking systems. Monitor energy before and after interactions. Consistent drain from specific relationships indicates psychological harm even when conversations feel pleasant. Use this as an objective measure of relational health. Communication frameworks. Express limits with short, clear statements that don't invite argument. I've noticed I need more space. Boundaries are declarations of intention, not requests for permission. Departure decision criteria. Establish clear indicators for when leaving becomes necessary. Repeated boundary violations after clear communication. Escalating manipulation when limits are expressed. Refusal to acknowledge harm. And attempts to weaponize empathy against the empath. These techniques transform unconscious flight into conscious choice, preserving protection while removing shock. Jung analyzed public figures who embodied empathic depth alongside firm boundaries, noting how they trusted intuitive warnings early, acted on them deliberately, and refused to sacrifice themselves to preserve connection. He also taught empaths how to recognize genuinely safe people. They respect no without demanding extended justification. They regulate their own emotions rather than outsourcing them. They value empathy without exploiting it. And they practice reciprocal consideration, actively reflecting on how their behavior affects others. To avoid harm, Jung warned about patterns common to those who target empaths. Rapid, dramatic self-disclosure intended to trigger rescue responses. Chronic micro-violations of boundaries paired with elaborate apologies. A cycle of love bombing mixed with subtle criticism. And anger or manipulation when limits are expressed. For maintenance, Jung emphasized simple, steady practices. Regular solitude to process emotion. Creative expression to channel sensitivity. Relationships with emotionally mature individuals, and consistent boundary practice, building skill with small limits so larger ones come naturally when required. Jung believed that empaths who learn conscious boundaries perform a crucial evolutionary function in human relationships. When sensitive people demonstrate that deep connection requires mutual respect rather than one-sided sacrifice, they model a healthier standard for everyone around them. He observed that unconscious empathic departure, while often necessary for survival, also serves what he called a collective teaching function. It pushes those left behind to confront emotional dependency and parasitic patterns. The empath's absence becomes a mirror, reflecting whether the remaining person truly cared or simply consumed empathic resources. Jung called this absence education. People often learn more about healthy dynamics from loss than from explanation. When someone who gave endlessly disappears, it exposes the one-sided nature of the bond in ways words seldom can. Empathic departures frequently trigger relationship awakening in those left behind. Some recognize their exploitative patterns and develop genuine reciprocity. Others reveal their true nature by resenting the loss of a resource rather than caring about the one who left. Culturally, Jung saw integrated empaths as living examples that sensitivity and strength can coexist. When they hold boundaries without losing warmth, they grant permission for others to do the same. This modeling is especially powerful for children and young adults forming their first relational templates. From a broader societal perspective, Jung believed emotional evolution depends on people who can feel deeply while thinking clearly about relationship patterns. Integrated empaths often become counselors, mediators, and healers, not because they sacrifice themselves, but because they understand both emotional depth and psychological protection. Many discover a calling to help others escape toxic dynamics or build emotional intelligence. Their path, from unconscious accommodation to conscious boundaries, becomes a roadmap for those walking similar terrain. On a systems level, Jung recognized that meaningful cultural change often begins when sensitive people refuse to uphold dysfunctional patterns. When empaths stop enabling toxic behavior through endless accommodation, social systems face a choice: evolve or reveal their dependence on exploitation. Jung described this as authenticity pressure. When the most accommodating person starts setting limits, others must either develop genuine empathy or search for new sources of emotional extraction. Workplaces, families, and communities that include integrated empaths tend to develop higher standards for emotional maturity and mutual respect. The empath's refusal to tolerate mistreatment raises the bar for everyone's behavior. From an evolutionary lens, the empath's movement from unconscious accommodation to conscious boundaries represents a step forward in how we relate and love. As more empaths integrate, cultures reach empathy tipping points, moments when sensitivity is recognized as psychological sophistication rather than a weakness to exploit. Integrated empaths become bridges between humanity's current emotional immaturity and its potential for conscious, respectful connection. In the end, the empath who leaves without warning and never returns isn't cruel. They are following an unconscious survival mechanism activated when conscious boundaries have failed completely. But there is another path. When you learn to recognize your unconscious warning signals and honor them, when you find the courage to set limits before crisis, you transform from an unconscious escape artist into a conscious creator of healthy relationships. Your sensitivity isn't a curse. It is high-resolution psychological equipment. Like any powerful instrument, it requires wisdom in application. Jung showed that the same psychological structure that makes you vulnerable to exploitation can also make you capable of profound love and connection, once it is properly protected. The choice is yours. Remain trapped in cycles of over-accommodation followed by sudden departure, or develop the conscious boundaries that allow your empathy to flourish in relationships built on mutual respect. If you've ever left without warning and never returned, claim your new pattern. I choose conscious boundaries. Your journey, from unconscious escape to conscious choice, isn't merely personal healing. It is a blueprint for healthier love, available to everyone who learns from your example. Thank you for listening. See you in the next dimension.